did that.
We're ready, guys. I'm sorry.
The noise is gone?
Your battery was going out.
Oh.
So you probably remember, but you were speaking about
His battery just went out. I was getting this weird.
Well, it's good timing there. Look at that.
yeah. So are we good?
We're good.
You were speaking about your father trying to get a job and deciding to start.
Right. So my dad wanted to get a job but couldn't. No matter what, he was willing to do anything just to learn more English. And so he decided, well, I have to make a living. And the apartment that my cousin took was the third floor apartment on Landon Court in Cincinnati. And it was $15 a month rent. I come back to that one. So my dad was naturally waiting for us to hear from what was happening. And the first 2 times I went back to the American consulate, my eyes were still swollen and red, and they didn't approve the visa. And my eyesight got better, and the war was on, and it was very difficult to get much food. And but my mother made it, and I learned how to cook. Not much, but learned how to cook. Calf's liver was the cheap, and not calf's liver, maybe beef liver. So we had mutton and beef liver. And when the third time we went to the consulate, they said, he gave us a 30-day visa, but I don't know how you can go to America because I have an embargo with all the submarines, the German submarines, being all over the place, and didn't realize they came to the shores of America, the American submarines. And but you go back to Hayes, and if anybody can find the transportation, they will. And they did find a Dutch boat which traveled under a convoy. Now, convoy is where 20 or 30 ships go together, and they have the American destroyers looking for the U-boats, and it took 16 days from England to the United States, because they go very slow because of the danger. And naturally we had the storage, the lowest cabins, and my mother and I took the boat, and we were so seasick. I mean, those 14, 16 days never seemed to end. And we come to America, the Statue of Liberty. And my dad was outside waiting with my sister, and he thought that he had lost all his teeth because he was chewing gum. In Europe, they didn't know what chewing gum is. And thank God his teeth were okay, but he was chewing gum. And so they check you out before they let you out. And you didn't go, this was at the US port of entry. And they said, oh, you had trachoma? We don't let anybody into the country who had trachoma. And I said, well, here I was operated on. Doesn't make any difference. It's a very contagious disease, trachoma. And it causes blindness because of your eyelids. You are going to Ellis Island. When my dad heard that, you can imagine. And your mother has to go too, because you live together, and if you had trachoma, she would also have it. So we go on a little boat to Ellis Island. Well, Ellis Island, they have the women's ward, and they put striped pajamas on the women, and they have the men's ward, and they put striped pajamas on the men. And they didn't let you use any of your luggage. They confiscated the luggage. And so they put me into a ward of 16 men who had trachoma coming from the Far East. And the window looked at the Statue of Liberty. And everybody that you talked to said, once you are in Ellis Island, you never will see America. We will ship you back where you came from. Well, you want to ship me back to Germany? So every morning you had the big hall where you get some food, and every morning a eye doctor, different doctors volunteered to Ellis Island to check out people who were at Ellis Island. So every day they would call me and say, see Dr. Smith today, and Dr. Smith would look at your papers, oh, glaucoma, and every time they looked at my eyes, not much the pain, but I fainted, emotionally, you know. So they got me back, and the sixth, and my dad went to Ellis Island every day. Hayes arranged it, and wrote me a note and could send me a candy bar. And I have the notes. Have faith in God. Everything will be okay. He never lost his faith. And the sixth or seventh day, a Jewish doctor was on staff. I'm sorry. He looked at me, looked at my eyes, he says, there's nothing wrong with your eyes. He said, get your clothes, whatever you were wearing, they put into a whatever. I'm going to get you out of here. And I said, my mother is, I'll get her out too. So he took me by his hand and he walked me through different checkpoints. And they said, well, you don't have permission. He said, yes, I do. Stamp it. You know, Jewish chutzpah. And the next guy, well, I don't see you, but stamp it. 3 different places. And we came up to this big hall. You've been to Ellis Island, where everybody waits for everybody. My dad and my sister were there. And my dad said, I will never go back to New York. And got my mother, and we went from Ellis Island to the train station to Cincinnati. What a miracle. And I was 14 years old. Got to Cincinnati, and this cousin had taken that apartment, and there were apartments available. First floor, $25, second floor, $20, third floor, $15. My dad said, for $10, I'll walk 3 flights of steps, you know? And so for the first time we were together. And thank God we had that cousin who later on went to Cedar Village, and she passed away at 98. She came over in 1934. And she had married a non-Jewish person, had a daughter. And with Hitler, if you were married to a Jew, you were a Jew. So she got divorced. She was smart enough. She left. And at that time, it was easier. I don't know exactly how she arranged it. But she got the visa for us through her boss. And she worked for a ladies' retail store in Cincinnati, and she was the seamstress. They were looking for a European to alter your ladies' clothes, and she went to him, and she said, when we were in England, she said, my cousin is in London, he needs a visa, there are 4 of them, I assure you he's not going to have a problem with him to support him. He will make a living one way or another. Would you give him a visa? And would you sign for the visa? And the guarantee that if he has financial problems, and he did. And then my dad and he became very good friends, we can imagine, afterwards. And that's how we got the visa. Well, when I came over, they said, well, you better go to school and improve your English. and get an education. So being 14, this was the end of April, and we lived very close in Avondale School. So I went to Avondale School, but it was toward the end of the school year, and this was 8th grade, and then they actually flunked me because I didn't know the English, didn't know what they were doing. However, good advice that the teacher gave me is go to youth high school for the summer and learn English. Yeah, that's great. So I went to summer school at youth, English, and this teacher, I only wished I would have remembered her name. She stayed after school every day to give me personal tutoring. And after the 8 weeks, she said, you tried so hard, I'm going to give you a passing grade of 70, but continue to learn English. So my dad was trying to make a living, and there I am at 14, don't know anything about schools. So he said, learn a trade so that you could make a living. So I always liked to work on automobiles and build things. So they advised me to go to, at that time, was Automotive High School, which is a vocational, today it's a different name. It's a 2-year program, 3 summers, 2 years, and they guarantee you a job as a mechanic. Ideal, it's just what I wanted. And somebody from Landon Court, another young man who was 16, went to that school, and he drove. So I got a ride to school, which was great. And I really liked the school, and I did not realize that everybody that went to that school flunked the school before, and they didn't qualify to go to a regular high school. I had no idea that was. And there were only 2 Jewish kids in that school. So I took a lot of abuse, being Jewish, being German, and so I got into a lot of fights. And I'm not the fighting type, but in Germany, God forbid you should touch a non-Jewish child, they put you away. So I got into fights, and they would take me to the principal and my homeroom teacher, and they said Paul wouldn't pick a fight if he wouldn't be picked on before. And he always got me out of it. So then the kids kind of had a little respect for me. Well, if he fights back, let's just leave him alone, you know. Well, I was one of the best students because I really wanted to learn, which they didn't like. And after 2 years, I got a job at Metropolitan Buick they put me in the carburetor. Most people don't know anymore what carburetors are. It's fuel injection. And I got the job and loved it, and did quite well fixing carburetors. So when they had people that got stuck, their car got stuck on Fountain Square one day, I gotta tell you this because it's remarkable. And this lady, named of Stern, she had a chauffeur and a big Buick limousine, and she got stuck on Fountain Square, so they told me to go there. And it was a simple thing that opened it up, fixed the carburetor, got it started. I got $1 tip. Now most people today, $1 is not much, but to me it was like $100. Later on, once we were in business, and I worked for 2 years as an automobile mechanic, and my dad had just started his business, and he had 2 salespeople had to go in the service, and I was 17 and a half. At 18, they would draft you at that time. And I was helping my dad. And then when I was 18, they deferred me from the army because of trachoma. So, and the war was kind of ending. So then my dad, and the business was in our apartment because we couldn't afford it. And he said, when you come out of the army and you still want to work with me, then we'll move into a bigger facility. But maybe you want to go back to be an automobile mechanic. So I joined his business till the salespeople he had came out of the army. And one day, a phone call came, and Mrs. Stern was looking for linens. She's building a home for the blind, which is still on 75 today. She had one child that was blind. And when she came up, and I said, "You don't remember me, but I remember you." And she became a fantastic customer ever since that. Cut. So that is basically my story.
Can I ask you a few more questions?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I feel, first of all, honored to hear. I want to go back a little bit to your childhood and before Hitler came to power. Just if you could speak a little bit about what like your home was like. Were you religious? What kind of were your parents into theater? What did you do as a family before? I know you were young before Hitler came to power, but what was your life like before that time period?
Before Hitler came into Germany, and being born in 1926, so by 1932 I started school, and I had a third sister between my oldest sister Lottie, and we were 2.5 years apart, and she had TB from very, very young. And what I remember about her is that she was sick all the time. And she had a lot of problems. So we had a maid, or somebody took care of us children, au pair, and who took very good care of my sister. Then she went to Switzerland. They thought maybe the high mountains would help her. And so she went, the au pair went with her, and my mother went back and forth. So our youth was very much involved with my sick sister. And I was very much into sports. I loved soccer. And at this park, there was frozen lakes, little ponds, and we went play ice hockey after school. And we had a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends. And we didn't really look, are they Jewish, not Jewish, or just kids that we went to school together. And we had, where we lived, we put up I don't know if you ever heard of ice bowling. You see it in the Olympics. I don't know what it's called now. So we poured the water, and we made one of those, and we played with that. And then we had a Jewish center, and I bicycled to the Jewish center, which was probably half an hour from there. And at age 12, I had a girlfriend. If you call it a girlfriend, I had a girlfriend, not a girlfriend, but a friend as a girl. And I still remember the men's bicycles have that. So I would put her in the middle, and we went to the bicycle together, and the police would stop us on the way home and said, "You're not allowed to take somebody on your bicycle." So after that, she took her own bicycle. And I played soccer a lot. And we went quite a bit on the outskirts of this park were all the beer kellers. And my dad loved sausage and real German food and beer. And so we went up there quite often. But just to show you now they have it here too, but the chauffeur couldn't sit with us, which I felt was terrible. So I told my dad, well, since he can't sit with us, but I can sit with him. He said, yes, you can. So I sat with the chauffeur, which was a wonderful person. I mean, I couldn't understand the hierarchy, I guess. And so my mother bought the salami kosher and the sausage, but we had all the fresh rolls and the pretzels and the beer, the big steins. And so that was enjoyable. And then on Saturday, my dad's business was open, and we walked, it was maybe 20 minutes. Every other day the chauffeur drove him there, but on Saturday he went there to look at the mail, and I went with him, and I played in the business. I thought I was working, but I really played, And then a little bit later on, I would go to synagogue every Saturday with my friends, and we would meet and walk together to synagogue. The whole city is not that big, but half an hour walk was no big deal. And beautiful, big, conservative synagogue. And the kids had fun afterwards. We got together, and and the morning that my sister passed away on Saturday night, and on Saturday we went to synagogue, and I said to them, I'll see you tomorrow if everything is well. And that's when she had passed. And I got home after synagogue, and she had passed away. And we children were not allowed to go to the cemetery. And the ceremony was in the cemetery. So that was a tough one. And my sister, being 5 years older, we were not very close. And her boyfriends were 10, 15 years older than she. And she resented my resentment about her boyfriends, because this man would come to the door and says, I'm picking up Lottie. And I would say, you're much too old for her. I don't think you want to go out with her. And she got mad at me. So I was trying to protect her, And our au pair, she was wonderful. And I'm going to tell you this story because it really is part of my life. She took us to the train station when we left. And she lived with us. And she actually lived with us for as long as I was, probably 15 years, before I was born. And when I got married, and I was 21 when I was married, so 47, my dad said, what do you want for your wedding? I said, I want Audie. That was her name, Audie. I want her to come over here, and maybe she could stay with us for a certain period, because she was always concerned that I would find a wife that would take care of me. She knew I was very, I was very sensitive. And she said, I don't think you'll ever find anybody that will appreciate your sensitivity. And I wanted her to meet Joyce. So my dad said, if that's what you want, I'll arrange it. She came over. I picked her up in New York from the boat. She lived with us. And she lived part of the time with my sister. But she said, and she was probably at that time 65, I don't want to be a burden to your dad. And in Germany they have like Social Security here, and I have Social Security and all that, and I'll stay for a year, then I'll go back home. And she stayed for a year. She was very happy to meet my wife. anyhow, going back to Germany, that was really my life. My dad was he was living like the rich people live, you know. And my mother, she was home and she was probably very social. And in the morning before we went to school, just to give you an idea, I had to knock on the bedroom door to see if I could come in to say goodbye to her. I mean, very formal. And my dad, we were not very close. He never believed it, but till we left, you know, I would go to school before he would leave. He would come home for lunch, which was the big meal. We had a big dining room, and he always brought many of the employees and customers. So we had anywhere from 15 to 20 people for lunch. We kids came home from school, went up, we were upstairs, the au pair, changed our clothes, got dressed, I mean, very formal, and they're ready for lunch for you, my sister too, and it should be seen but not heard. We wouldn't dare say anything because they were talking about business and everything else. And then all I would say is when we finished eating, may I be excused? Did you finish everything? Okay, you're excused. And then in the evening, you see, they took 2 hours lunch. Say from 12 to 2, he'd go back to business from 2 to 4. From 4 to 5, he would go to the cafe and play cards and have coffee and cake. Then he'd go back to work at 5 till 8. And then when he came home at 8:30 or 9, we kids were asleep already, and they only had, like we had lunch here, a sandwich or something. So I really didn't. Then on Saturday, we would go to synagogue. He didn't. Sunday, they would take the children for a walk in the park, which was right across the street. And we got dressed up, and my sister was still alive then. All three were wearing the same clothes, like Navy outfits. You may have seen it in the old movies. And they showed off the kids, maybe for an hour or two. And then we went home, couldn't get rid of the clothes, and went out to play. A lot of bicycling, we went to the park, and you know, a lot of activities. But so there was no closeness really with it, which once we left, then it was a different story. But I remember then also my mother's parents walked with us. They were dressed up, bow tie, the high hat, unbelievable. I mean, I would never see my grandfather without being dressed with formal dress. My dad always a tie and a coat. I mean, just unbelievable. Now, my dad's father died when he was 51. He had pneumonia. So I never met him. My grandmother stayed in the little village, and her neighbors took care of her acreage, because in Europe, the village, they lived together, and all the acreage is outside the village. So she would take the geese still, and the chicken, she'd pick up the eggs, that she took care of, but not the land. And at that time, they had these white big geese. And she would put the geese between her legs, has an apron on, and stuff her with corn. Big corn, which was feed corn. I couldn't eat corn for the first 30 years, you know, and because they took the geese to the market, and for every pound she could stuff in, she'd get more money for it. Well, so we went there every summer and stayed with her. And my mother and dad would come maybe every 2-3 weeks. It was a 4 or 5 hour drive at that time. But my sister, at that time, my sick sister wouldn't go. But my other sister and I, we would stay with her. And she would, that was her best time. And she would spoil us rotten and cook for us. And she was very religious, extremely kosher, and the neighbors, they were all somehow cousins, second cousins, or just good friends. But the whole village had 100 families. 50 were Jewish, 50 were Catholic. So there was a very close knit, and the synagogue was right across the street. And my dad in 1926, he completely repaired the synagogue in my honor. Big plaque in honor of Paul. And then when Hitler came, he destroyed the synagogue and burned the Torahs and all that. So we had a good time, and they had a keller. You know what a keller is? They had a play area in the part of the village, and they built an underground basement, they called it, a keller, where they had the beer kegs. They didn't have ice cubes or ice makers, but being underground, it would keep it cool. So when my dad came for the weekend, he would bring, you know, all the sausages and the food, and he ordered a beer keg, and he invited the whole village for a picnic. And we kids would play football, and still remember they loved my dad. And then for Christmas, we would drive to Demmelsdorf, and in his trunk, he had a Christmas present for everybody in the village. The kids. Because my grandma, she said, now you write me down the age and who they are. And so when they heard that Uncle Carl, Uncle Charlie, was coming, they followed the car. And he stopped in front of my grandma's house, and she came out, and then she would call, she knew them all by name, and he had something for everybody. And he loved it. He just loved it.
So did he start the family business?
Over in
Germany?
In Germany, no. The business that he took over, he actually worked for a competing company. He was in the First World War. He was in the Quartermaster Corps because he didn't want to be in the front lines. And you know what the Quartermaster Corps is. And he took care of the distribution, and he came out in 1918. And was looking for a job. So he got this job with this company, which was later on a competitor, and he did everything from sweeping the floors to, and then they asked him to chauffeur or go with the salespeople. They had big trunks of samples to carry the trunks and to help the salesman take care of the trunks. And he listened to them, and then after 6 months, he came back and he said, you know, I can do that. I don't have to be the Lehrling, which was the, you had to be for a year to learn the business. What do they call it here? Apprentice. And so you only got paid for the room and board, and that was it. And he said, I don't want to be the apprentice anymore. If you will give me some accounts, and they didn't have it by territory, they had it by potential accounts, I want to prove to you I can sell. And he was maybe then 22, 23. And they said, well, all the ones we have, nobody could sell them. We're sure you can't either. And he says, well, give me a chance. And they still didn't pay him, but you would get commission if you could sell them. Well, the first 6 months, he sold 2 out of 10. Then they gave him better accounts, and he did quite well. And while he was with the company maybe 5 years, the competing company went out of business and was for sale. Didn't have any money, and his parents didn't have any money. So he went to his cousins. They were all big families. Like my dad only had one sister, but my grandmother, there were 11 of them. So they had big families because the farm, they could only work the farm if they had a lot of children. And so he went to them and asked them, and 3 of them each gave him 100,000 marks, which today is maybe $10,000 here. I don't know. And he said, I'll pay it back within 5 years. And he paid him back within 3 years. And he did basically what we did when we started here. He made his exclusive designs. And all his, at that time, nobody could buy ready-made clothes, only yard goods. And they would have, I don't know if you ever heard this, dirndl. This was clothing for the girls, which was all prints. You saw it maybe in the movies. And so he designed his own prints. So they couldn't buy another print if they wanted to reorder it. And he sold all those little country stores who had everything from food, clothing, everything. And they would buy 2 meters or 2 yards of this and 3 yards of this. It was a very small business, but they did okay. And then having his own designs, he hired more salespeople and he did okay. And then came the Depression, 1930. Well, he always said, I will never borrow any money. And he never did. And everybody else owed money and the bank took over your business. Was a good example here in 2008. And so he didn't owe anything to the bank. He had cash. And where people had items for $1, they would sell them for a nickel. And he had the cash, so he could buy it. And the nickel item he would sell for 50 cents. That's where he made a lot of money. And then he put the money into real estate, which Hitler took over later on. But he made a lot of money and he spent a lot of money. But he was very successful doing that. And so that was basically from the years I forget, but I was born in 26, probably my sister was born in 20, she was 5 years, 21. And that's how he grew, but only sold in Germany.
And your parents, did they have, you said that religion, Judaism was important, but
Yes.
did they have also a lot of non-Jewish friends? Were they assimilated?
No, over there you weren't. And then also the house that he had, and I don't know how he got it, I don't know, but we had 2 kitchens, a kosher kitchen, no, a milchig and a fleischig, because my grandmother would not come and visit unless we had 2 separate kitchens. And we were strictly kosher at home. I don't think he was strictly kosher out. I couldn't say that. And so the last 36, since 1936, she moved in with us. Because my dad didn't want her to stay by herself in that village. And then, ever heard of the Stürmer? Well, he got to Demmelsdorf and he had every street corner his newspaper and get rid of the Jews and the Jews are terrible. And so he kind of forced her to really move to Cincinnati, I was going to say, move to Munich. And, but she wouldn't have moved if he wouldn't have 2 separate kitchens. And they had stoves twice as big as my desk, coal stoves to cook on. So I still remember we went in the basement and we played in the basement. It was a big basement because he had those big coal, everything was big. So she moved in and then she passed away in 1936, 37. My sister passed away in 36.
And are they buried in Demmelsdorf?
In
Munich?
In Munich. No, my grandmother is buried in Demmelsdorf. She wanted to be next to her husband. But my parents are buried here. So, but in Munich, Thea, my middle sister, is buried in Munich, right next to her grandfather from my mother's side, because they both died within 6 months. And I visited them when I was over there in 2010. And we have perpetual care there too, and they're well maintained. The Jewish cemetery in Munich, they have an old Jewish cemetery from the 1800s and what they call the new from the 1900s. I'm going to excuse myself. I'm going to go to the washroom if any of you would like to.
Okay.